Chapter 1783. Like in history, the Twilight Fortress was definitely the Alliance's fault. After all, the fortress was too close to the dwarves' Loch Moden. The fortress that was supposed to be on the Twilight Highlands was less than 300 kilometers away from the eastern border of Loch Moden. Before the Cataclysm, the entire Twilight Highlands was under the protection of N'Zatha's evil power and was hidden behind a chain of towering mountains. Although Duque knew where the Twilight Highlands was before the Cataclysm, the Twilight Highlands was just a wasteland with an average altitude of more than 4,000 meters. The air was thin and there was nothing there. Perhaps it was because the Alliance's attack on the Twilight cult was too severe, or after the Cataclysm, the Twilight Highlands that was supposed to be the Twilight Highlands was not as expected. Anyway, after Duque sent Lang and Kale, that's to lead a large force to wipe out the Twilight believers in the grim battle fortress, the Twilight Highlands became different from history. It was still filled with all kinds of death aura and changes in the Earth's crust. But there were no Twilight believers. It was a waste of effort for Duque to train the Highland troops to fight in the mountains. Fighting in the Highlands was not the same thing as fighting in the plains at low altitude. The air was thin because of the high altitude. Water that could be boiled at 100 degrees Celsius could not be boiled in the Highlands. If they were still using the old steam-driven flying battleships, they would definitely fall from the sky and die. Not only did the weapons have to be redesigned, but the people also had to be rearranged. Before Duque traveled through time, every year people from the Celestial Empire would travel to the Highlands and die because they could not withstand the altitude sickness. It was not until the incident in the Barren Lands that Duque realized that the Twilight believers had gone to the Horde to cause trouble. Ha 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 ha. Duque suddenly felt refreshed. In a sense, the Cataclysm was like a preview of Return of the Legion. It was no longer possible for them to concentrate all their troops and experts to launch an all-out attack like before. However, most of the strong enemies in the Cataclysm were under the control of the current alliance. Even if he was prepared, Duque was still quite nervous. This was especially true for a few spots in the Eastern Kingdom. Duque had spent 10 years to forge the Rotterdam Kingdom and the southern continent into an impregnable fortress. He did not want to see the situation that he had painstakingly built be destroyed. According to history, the southern continent suffered the most. Next to the wetlands of the dwarves was grim battle, and east of Loch Moden was the Twilight Citadel. Originally, the Black Rock Mountain would be the Black Rock Cave and the Black Wing Blood Ring. Zalbalad, an outlying island in the southwest of Gilneas, was even more haunted by the Paladin prison. But it was a little funny now. The Twilight Citadel, which was supposed to be the most difficult to deal with, was now in the hands of the Horde. The final boss of the Twilight Citadel was Onyxia's mother, Sinestra. According to the player's evaluation, she was more difficult to deal with than Deathwing. Just let her do whatever she wants to the tribe. At least on Duque's side, at least Onyxia wouldn't have to face the tragedy of family ethics again. As for Paladin prison, it was a fucking prison. Could it be that if Duque had known about this beforehand, he would still let the prisoners in there cause trouble? After the second battle of the Dark Portal, the Paladin fortress on the outlying island was converted into a prison to hold the scariest prisoners in Azeroth. Back then, the first prisoners were a few injured Gorons and a large group of ogres and Horde werewolves. The purpose was to conduct research. During the third battle, when Archimonde led the main force of the Burning Legion west to the Endless Sea, they ran to Mount Hyjal to cause trouble. Actually, there were still a large number of demons aimlessly destroying and killing everywhere. After the elite army of the Alliance wiped out these demons, the Kirin Tor mages left some demons behind for research purposes. Back then, Duque had also agreed to this. Of course, he had a better understanding of the characteristics of demons, but what if the demons were different from the ones in history? Nothing was more convincing than first-hand experimental data. The Kirin Tor mages had built an extremely tight magical imprisonment system in the prison, so that the demons who were not yet Void Lords had no chance of escaping. However, the destructive impact of the Cataclysm was destined to cause damage to the prison's defense system. After the Battle of the Lich King in Northrend, the first thing Duque did was to visit the Paladin prison. Coincidentally, he found that the three targets who were supposed to cause trouble during the Cataclysm had secretly advanced to low-level Void Lords. Firstly, under the prison's powerful magical suppression, their strength was not even half of their peak. Secondly, they had hidden their strength very well. But how could they hide it from Duque? Duque gave an order, saying that there were prisoners who wanted to cause trouble. Immediately, a large number of the Alliance's rookies were transferred here to train. Mara Fordragon, Lena Thunderspear, the dwarf paladin Crum Twilight's Hammer, the troublemaking dwarf mage Millhouse Mana Storm, the great mage Aniet, the great conjurer Mimic, the hunter Lenera, with Duque, Queen Sylph and Magni, who had yet to turn into a diamond, the Abyss Lord Argaros and the two-headed Hellhound Ocutor were all killed after a fierce battle. Of course, souls couldn't escape. Lord Duque, the former Void Lord, used soul annihilation for the first time in a long time. This made the Eridar Gemini, who had turned into a female elf mage and hid their faces in their hoods, fall silent for a long time. Only Queen Elizabar, who belonged to the same race as Mother Shiraz and belonged to Shivala, was left behind. Duque did a small experiment. He used the same method he used to deal with Onyxia to deal with this Queen of Hatred. The driving force of hatred was to hate the world, or to look down on the arrogant attitude of lower lifeforms. Duque taught this six-armed, murderous female demon a lesson, the meaning of endless reincarnation torture. In the illusion that the system specially created for her, Elizabar was first asked by Duque's illusion, "Do you surrender?" If she received a negative answer or if she remained silent for more than 3 seconds, the next stage would be the countless Karaji insect men rushing out and swallowing the defenseless Elizabar whole. That was the cruelest kind of devouring. The huge mouthparts did not care about the demon's poisonous blood. Elizabar could clearly feel the sharp and rough mouthparts slowly tearing off her flesh. The bones in her 6 arms were forcefully chewed to pieces. The sensation from the resonance of her bones and flesh was equally clear. She screamed and struggled but found that she could not resist at all. She could only watch in despair and fear as the huge insects pulled out her intestines and swallowed them piece by piece. Chapter 1784. Elizabeth hoped that the first bite the worm took was her head. Unfortunately, it wasn't. The worm began to eat from the fingers and toes of her 6 arms, bit by bit, section by section, rhythmically from bottom to top, eating her up bit by bit. Until she was left with only her head, she could still see how the worm's mouth, full of blood and mucus, had bitten off her face. Then she resurrected. Once again he appeared in front of the hungry Zergs and scathed. "Do you surrender?" "Yes, I surrender." Most demons were psychopathic, and the desire to kill and destroy that exceeded most creatures in the mortal world was one of the most prominent characteristics of the Burning Legion demons. Not many existences knew that the evil existences that mortals called demons did not have as strong a will as imagined. After being eaten by the illusion a dozen times, Elizabeth collapsed. She immediately shouted for surrender. "Very good, you've surrendered, but you're not convinced yet. You need the second stage of the lesson. This time you don't have the final say, I have the final say," the illusion Duque announced. Then Elizabeth received the torture of the various demon bosses' illusions. From Sargeras to Kill Jaden to Archimond, and then to the famous bosses of the various demon races in the Legion, such as the leader of the Dreadlord, Tichondrius. Regardless of whether they were dead or alive, they would take turns to fight. From whipping the tri-horned horse, to the common soul torture of various legions, to the unique torture of each legion leader. Those feelings were all real because this was the feeling that Duque had obtained from experimenting on the captured demons when he attacked the Outland. Among them was Shivala, who had been captured from the Darkness Temple. The system elf connected the demon's nervous system from the spine of the neck of the demon, accurately receiving the bioelectricity and soul data from all parts of the body. It sorted out and classified them, carefully evaluated their strength and stimulation, and finally copied the biological nerve signals and soul senses that represented pain, and used them on the illusion attack. Then Duque also extracted the memories of the Eridar twins. These 2 demonesses had done a lot of bad things in the past 25,000 years. Due to Duze's actions in the ancient war, they had been tortured by Kill Jaden for the past 10,000 years. When Duque copied their pain memories, Elizabeth really felt that her balls were always torturing her. Demons were never obedient children who did not fight back. Under the extreme pain, she had long forgotten that it was Duque who cast the illusion on her. Because in her memories, it was the Burning Legion's boss who was torturing her. It was all accumulated hatred towards the Burning Legion. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the infinite Azeroth spell that only Duque possessed. As long as Duque was willing, he could use a million different ways to torture Elizabar. In this extremely terrifying torture of the mind, body, and soul, Queen of Hatred Elizabeth changed. In the open space of the prison, the Eridar twins looked at Elizabeth, who was being pressed on the head by Duque's doppelganger. At first, they kept twitching as if they were having an epileptic seizure. Their facial expressions relaxed for a moment, and then became extremely tense again. At the most exaggerated point, this 6-armed demoness had urinary and fecal incontinence and was bleeding from her 7 orifices. Unfortunately, Duque used shadow healing, and used shadow energy to repair her body. The Gemini knew that Duque was doing an experiment to see if he could use a more perfect mind control method to dominate a real Void Lord. This was not the terrible, demon enslavement that warlocks used to forcibly dominate a demon's mind and suppress its will, but a more vicious brainwashing. They did not dare to make a sound for fear that Duque's methods would be used on them. If it was a simple brainwashing, Duque would only need 1 second, but there was a high chance that it would burn Elizabeth's brain and destroy her soul. Therefore, Duque experimentally and rhythmically adjusted the output of the system's doppelganger. Finally, after 10 minutes, Elizabeth's entire body collapsed to the ground in a rather inelegant crawling position. Her face stuck to the dirty ground, covered in mud. As she twitched and got up, Duque asked her, "Answer me, Demoness, who is the existence you hate the most?" The Chevalier leader replied without hesitation, "Kill Jaden." The way she gnashed her teeth was as if Kill Jaden had raped her 10,000 times and killed her 10,000 times. The next moment, however, she shivered. Duque had injected another illusion into her, allowing her to relive what she had seen in the illusion from a third-person perspective. She only felt that her soul had frozen in that instant, because of absolute fear. The reason why the Burning Legion's triumvirate was terrifying was that they had the supreme power to destroy a planet at will. Unexpectedly, this native demigod in front of her had a power that was completely different from the triumvirate. It was a special technique that played with memories and tortured the soul. It was ironic that there would come a day when the demons, who were best at torturing other creatures, would concede defeat in torturing methods. The Queen of Hatred's legs softened, and she knelt down with a crash, all 6 palms pressed on the ground, and her once noble head now bowed to Duque. This time it was Duque himself who asked faintly, "Do you really want to surrender?" "Yes, I'm sincere." Duque carefully observed the lie detector in the system genie. This was the reference value calculated through big data statistics by torturing tens of thousands of demons, recording their heartbeats, blood reactions, and soul fluctuations. The lie detector showed that she really surrendered. Very good. Duque slightly pulled up the Queen of Hatred's crown and branded a special Titan rune mark on her forehead. Ah! It was a heart-wrenching scream. Leaving the Queen of Hatred limp on the ground, Duque said lightly to Gemini, "From now on, she will be your pawn." Duke Marcus. His methods were terrifying. Back to the present, because of Du's vicious attack, the molten core was flooded. The entire Black Rock Mountain became a large fountain. Not only did he force the Black Iron Dwarves out, but it seemed that even Nefarian, who was supposed to be resurrected as a zombie dragon and reoccupy the Black Rock Mountain, was also gone. After all, after Nefarian's body was stolen, Duque had already predicted that Nefarian would jump out again. Duque himself suppressed the main force and did not move, because he was ready to wait for Nefarian to come out to seek death, and then destroy him with lightning speed. In fact, Duque did not know that because he had previously tricked Deathwing so badly that not even a few bones were left, Enzos had to let Deathwing eat his own son. Therefore, there was no such place as the Blackwing Blood Ring in this world after the Cataclysm. Without the Paladin Prison, the Twilight Fortress, and the Blackwing Blood Ring, the Alliance's 3 biggest internal problems were removed. Chapter 1785. Don't even think about going out if your house is on fire. Everyone knew this. While the Alliance was quickly eliminating internal threats, the Horde was in a great crisis. The existence of the new Twilight Fortress was like a fish bone stuck in the throat of the Horde. Even though the barren lands were barren, their geographical location was extremely important. To the east of Duroder was the sea, and to the north was Azhara. To contact the other territories of the Horde, they had to go west or south. No matter where they went, they had to go through the barren lands. The lava rift that stretched from the northeast to the southwest and divided the barren lands into 2 halves was already a headache for the Horde. It was originally something that could be solved by building a few bridges, but when Gujar stirred up trouble, it suddenly became a matter of life and death for the Horde. The reason why the great chiefs never let the traitors go was because, although a strong foreign enemy would oppress the Horde, they would also unite the Horde. And the traitors would split the Horde and dig out the roots of the Horde. Ghoul, Dan and the Blackhand brothers from before had all met with a good end. Of course, for a moron like Gurus, it was only because the betrayal made him lose face, which was also against tradition. Damn it. I can't trust other races. I should have twisted off all the heads of that 2-headed monster. Moron Roar was indeed worthy of the name Hellscream. At least his voice was loud enough that his roar could be heard by the entire Wisdom Valley. Of course, he had the right to speak without thinking and hurt the hearts of other races, but this time the other chiefs could only pretend that they didn't hear him. This was because this incident was not just a problem in the Orc territory, but several large areas around it had been attacked by the Twilight Dragon. The barren lands were said to be barren lands. It was a very simple problem of the food chain. How could a barren land support a large number of herbivores? Without large herbivores, how could a giant creature like the dragon who was at the top of the food chain survive? To the northwest of the Vine Oasis was the Stoneclaw Mountain area. To the west was Magolii, which was covered in green grass and herds of kodos. The main city of the Tauren Thundercliff was here. To the southwest was Feralas, which was lush with vegetation. About 300 kilometers to the east was the nest of the Dark Spear Trolls, Dark Spear Island. Further west of the Thundercliff was a desolate oasis in the middle of the region. These were all F*King tribal territories, and the Twilight WRMS that had been nurtured by Nesario had completely treated these places as their hunting grounds and back gardens. Ordinary tribal warriors couldn't fight against these terrifying dragons at all. Once upon a time, the great dragon scientist Nefarian had researched a new type of dragon, the multicolored fish powder. Oh no, it was the multicolored dragon. Nefarian's research direction was to fuse the abilities of the pentashade dragons in an attempt to create a new all-round dragon that was not afraid of the power of the dragons. He also used the technology of the goblins to speed up its growth, and finally succeeded in creating the colorful dragons. Although there was a huge gap between their strength and that of a real giant dragon, their advantage lay in their rapid growth, the ease of mass production, and the lack of fear of giant dragon power. Unfortunately, this research had just made a breakthrough when it was discovered by the Red Dragon Army. Then Dumuk led a team to cause trouble and destroyed this great invention. Nefarian's biological mother, Sinestra, the spouse that Deathwing had forcibly brought back, had been conducting research in this area alone. Although her purpose was not to fight against the dragon aspect, but to take revenge on the crazy Deathwing. Sinestra noticed that the batch of black dragon eggs that had been brought to the Outland by a certain dragon during the Second Orc War had mutated in the broken world of the Outland because of the chaotic energy in the Twisted Void, and a new type of dragon was hatched, the Nether Dragon. The Nether Dragon was not as powerful as the dragon aspect, but it grew rapidly. Because it was born in the Outland environment, it had no connection with the Black Dragon Army, and was not affected by the fallen power of the ancient gods. However, it was enslaved by Magtheridon and later Illidan's Fell Orc tribe. Sinestra successfully obtained a large batch of nether dragon eggs from Zuluhid, the chief of the Dragonmaw tribe, and began her own transformation. After many experiments, she and her blood elf Zendari finally found a way to combine the essence of a black dragon with the essence of a nether dragon, and infused it into her own dragon eggs. In the end, a new type of dragon was hatched, the Twilight Dragon. Compared to other dragons, the Twilight Dragon's strength was comparable. Its special ability was to create a unique domain of twilight, and use this space to crazily absorb energy from the outside world to promote its growth. As long as there was enough energy for it to absorb, it would only take a few months or even a few weeks for it to hatch to adulthood. Ordinary dragons, on the other hand, needed 1,000 years to hatch to adulthood. Moreover, this new type of dragon was evil and greedy, even more so than the fallen black dragon. Sinestra died because of the backlash. Although Sinestra died, the remaining Twilight Dragon eggs and the transformation technology had been mastered by Deathwing. After that, Deathwing reconciled with the ancient god. With the power of the ancient god, Deathwing perfected this technology, simplifying the process of corruption into a kind of corruption power. No matter what kind of dragon's egg, if infected, could quickly hatch into an evil Twilight Dragon. Moreover, these Twilight Dragons had no brains and only obeyed the orders of Deathwing. Even if an adult dragon was contaminated by this evil power, it would be difficult to escape the fate of corruption. With the technology to transform the Twilight Dragon and the various dragon eggs stolen by the Twilight Hammer cult, Deathwing established a Twilight Dragon Legion in a very short period of time. Whether it was quantity or quality, it was enough to fight against the allied forces of the four dragon aspects. Such a Twilight Dragon was not something that the weak air force of the tribe could fight against. Whether it was the brave orcs, the stronger Tauren, the trolls who were good at throwing javelins, or the goblins of the Rustwater conglomerate who were placed in the Stenettlin mountain in this life, none of them were a match for the Twilight Dragons. Originally, Gorin of the Desolace was not afraid of the Twilight Dragons. But these brainless Twilight Dragons still angered Gorin's boss, Dragon Slayer Gruul. Most of the dragons were highly intelligent creatures. When Gruul played the Black Dragon Skewer in the Blade Peak Mountain, a large number of black dragons were shocked. Except for the first few black dragons, and later a dozen black dragons who went for revenge but failed to kill Gruul, there was no trace of the black dragons in the Blade Peak Mountain. Gruul did the same this time. After killing the Twilight Dragons, he played the Dragon Skewer. But the Twilight Dragons had no brains. They were still indifferent to the corpses of their companions. They hunted those that should be killed, set those that should be set on fire. They made Gruul's territory a mess and many Gorons died. Why is the nearby Dust Wallow swamp fine? The brainless roar cursed. The Alliance has Onyxia. Chapter 1786. Comparisons were odious. When comparing goods, one had to throw them away. If the Alliance did not have Duque, they would be like the Horde, helpless against the Twilight Dragon's invasion. When a giant dragon reached adulthood, its defense, attack and vitality would all be considerable. If a young dragon could still be injured by lighter weapons such as flintlocks and javelins, then once they reached adulthood, their hardened scales and dragon skin would allow them to ignore damage from cannons and below. The tribe had an air force and most of them were two-legged flying dragons. Unfortunately, as a pseudo-dragon, it could not overcome the natural flaw of a true dragon like the Twilight WRM. Once it encountered a real dragon, the wyvern would panic and lose control. It would either flee or fight back, but it would be as weak as a lowly whose clothes had been torn off and forced into a corner. Gruul was very strong, but in the end, this monster with a demigod body was just a super large infantry. No matter how fast it ran, how could it keep up with so many Twilight Dragons that were flying around like blind flies? Only then did the Horde realize how heaven-defying it was for the Alliance to have a demigod dragon directly under them. This was cheating. The Dust Wallow Swamp was Onyxia's lair. Before she went to Stormwind to wreak havoc, this once evil she-dragon was a local tyrant. Don't look at how she was ordered around by Duque after being subdued by Duque. In fact, she had many underlings. More than 10 adult dragons, more than 100 baby dragons, more than 300 dragon beasts, and about 1,000 to 800 baby dragons. This was the entire lineup of her little brother army. After knowing that the Twilight Fortress had been moved to the Barren Lands, Duque put Onyxia back in her lair so that she and Janus Theramore could cover for each other. If something went wrong, they could cover each other's escape. He knew that Onyxia was like a Haushikuhaki, killing more than 100 Twilight Dragons in a row without panting. Could this be the legendary Swamp, Mountain, 100-Dragon Tyrant? After causing the Twilight Dragon to run to Dust Wallow Swamp, Braindead Roar cursed, "Is there no one stronger than the Twilight Fortress to deal with that lowly female dragon?" There was an answer. If that person came out, it was guaranteed that Onyxia would follow her heart. Following her heart, wasn't it just the word, coward? The boss of the Twilight Fortress was naturally Onyxia's old mother, Sinestra. The problem was that her mother had been dead for a long time and was now a corpse dragon. Did the zombie dragon need to eat? Stop joking. As long as Wings and the Great Mother didn't make a move, Onyxia was the undisputed ruler of the skies. The Twilight Dragons had a couple of powerful players, but they were nothing compared to the new Earth Guardian dragon Ao. However, Onyxia just guarded her own nest and didn't go anywhere. She would kill whoever came and she wouldn't go out. It was as if she was a lady from a respectable family who never left the house. To put it bluntly, she was an otaku. Because of Brainless Roar, the Horde fell out with the Alliance. The Alliance pretended not to notice the Horde's predicament. Little Salyafar secretly asked Wajin, "What's the situation on the Alliance's side?" Wajin smiled bitterly, "The Alliance continues to report the situation to me. The Storm Naga went to Vastur, the Blood Elves went to Uldum, the Dwarves and the Alliance's flying fleet are cleaning up Grim Battle, and the Alliance's navy is dealing with the riots in Barradin Prison. They look very busy." Several foreign chiefs smiled bitterly. After working with the Alliance for so many years, they roughly knew how much the Alliance had. Although the Alliance looked like they were putting out fires everywhere, in fact the Alliance's main force didn't move at all. As the Alliance's strongest force, Duque didn't participate in the war. The infantry of Stormwind, the elites of the Watchtower, and the 2 flying cities. They didn't even need to use their main forces. Just the flying insect army of the Karaji insect people would be enough to fight evenly with the Twilight Dragon army of the Barren Land. The Alliance was now obviously unhappy with Gurus Hellscream. Since the great chief of the Horde didn't even give the Alliance an invitation, why should the Alliance go all the way from the Eastern Kingdom to help you get rid of the Twilight Fortress? It was at this time that Gurus made up his mind. The territory of the Horde must be defended by us. Varrock, gather all the warriors of the Horde, we will attack the Twilight Fortress in the Barren Lands. Yes. Varrock punched his chest and accepted the order. Perhaps Gurus' diplomatic strategy was a mess, but at least he was qualified as an orc leader. Fighting for the orcs, fighting for the territory, this kind of heroism from ancient times touched Varrock's heart. At this moment all the orcs and foreign chiefs including Varrock, didn't think that Gurus was such a scam. Thus, since the establishment of the new horde, the largest war mobilization began. The orcs, Tauren, trolls, goblins and the Forgotten, these 5 major races could be said to be the elites. With a large number of escorts from Gollans, more than 1 million troops were coming from all directions, ready to besiege the nail in the heart of the horde, the Twilight Fortress. When Duque heard this news he laughed, "Ha! This is really interesting. Then I wish Mr. Gurus victory, and let him become a hero of the horde." To be honest, Duque didn't think that Braindead Roar would be able to defeat the Black Dragon's mother at all. The Deathwing family was a rather difficult existence to deal with, and who knew how many players had been traumatized by it in the past. Onyxia's deep breaths, Nefarian's 5-colored rock-paper-scissors, Sinestra's yo-yos, and the mighty Deathwing actually split and attacked multiple times. However, Duque still gave Onyxia a death order. If she saw her mother charging over, she had to run without another word, even if she had to abandon Theramore. Duque didn't want to lose a well-tamed female black dragon. At this time Tyron sent a message. "Come quickly, Duque." As expected, Ragnaros's target is Mount Hyjal. Mount Hyjal had been the holy land of the Night Elves for tens of thousands of years. Even during the third battle at the Dark Portal, they had to give up a large part of the forest in order to kill Archimonde, and almost the entire mountain was blown up. Even so, the elves didn't completely give up on Mount Hyjal. A large number of druids stayed on Mount Hyjal, hoping to restore the holy mountain, which had been mostly destroyed by the explosion, to its original state. It didn't matter if it took 100, 1,000, or 10,000 years. Anyway, even if they lost their endless life, the Night Elves were still a race with terrifying longevity. Chapter 1787. Because the Land of Fire had descended. Chromatus was a perfect multicolored dragon. He had 5 different heads, and each head had the special power of a dragon. His appearance reminded Duque of the true multicolored fish egg powder. Unfortunately, in the Cataclysm, their grand 1,000-year plan was destined to face the most severe challenge. Be it our duty or the policies of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, they did not place Mount Hyjal as a priority area to defend. However, Mount Hyjal has a special meaning to me and the entire Night Elves. It symbolizes the inheritance of nature's harmonious will. If possible, I do not want Mount Hyjal to experience a second destruction. Most importantly, I saw many things in the dream. It is very likely that you, Duque, have seen those things as well. Duque did not care about Malfurion's feelings. He carefully looked at the data flowing down from the system on his retina. Azeroth seems to be resisting the integration of the fire elemental plane. That is the unconscious resistance of the planet's will. This will not buy too much time. 10 days, at most half a month. However, in the history of the game, there was no appearance of this strange dragon that looked like a patchwork monster. At this moment, what the elves on Mount Hyjal heard was not the sound of the collapsing southern foothills, but the sound of the Land of Fire. Isra looked like an elf in military attire, but she did the human court etiquette. She pressed her hands lightly on her abdomen and bowed to Duque. "Duque, I am very sorry. I am afraid I will have to trouble you again this time." Suddenly, Isra noticed that Duque's gaze seemed to be focused on the 2 green lines on her face. Night Elves like to paint their faces, and Duque naturally did not like those messy things. The corner of Duque's mouth rose. The so-called Twilight Judgment destroyed everything? That was a terrible and boring dream. Isra's tone was obviously heavier towards the end. "Lord Isra." Tyrant and Malfurion bowed at the same time. Sound was transmitted by vibration. If the space collapsed and the vibration could not be transmitted, then it was a different matter. That was a very strange scene. How much longer? Tyrant, Malfurion, and the other Night Elves were the most nervous. In the Alliance, the person with the most authority on spatial studies was none other than Duque. Soon, Isra focused all his attention on Duque. In this level of spatial collision, the side with the smaller spatial composition was directly annihilated. Clearly sensing Duque's slight displeasure, Isra tilted his head slightly and smiled, then the lines on his face disappeared instantly. With that, Duque waved his hand, and a 3D topographic map of Mount Hyjal appeared in front of him. Duque flipped his finger and a red line cut the entire mountain range into 2. To the north of the red line, there was another blue line. In the Night Elves, Isra's position was extremely high. He was even higher than Alexstrasza, who gave the World Tree life, and Nozdormu, who gave the Night Elves eternal life. Understood. Malfurion noticed that Tyron was holding Duque's hand tightly when she asked Duque. He sighed quietly. Duque nodded slightly as a sign of respect. After all, they were both demigods. Who knew that Isra had a completely different explanation? They were slightly surprised but not nervous. Isra was not only Cenarius's adoptive mother, but also the true teacher of the Druids. At this time, a wave of psychedelic colors began to ripple in the air around the three of them. In fact, even though the outer shell of the world tree was charred black with no leaves left and only a pile of bare branches, a powerful druid could still feel the existence of life just by touching the trunk. The emerald green spatial door that looked like a blooming flower opened, and a creature with green hair and the appearance of a night elf stepped out. The intricate dragon horns on her head revealed her identity as a dragon. The sound did not correspond to the effect, and it gave people a very confused feeling. It was obvious that the Firelands and the main plane of Azeroth hadn't completely merged yet. The intermittent sound of the flames was the best proof. Nordrassil was the best example. If the descent of the Wind God throne was like a city in the sky descending, and the tidal throne merged with the Azeroth plane because it was in the deep sea, it was even more silent. The descent of the Land of Fire was incomparably domineering. "Hello, Duque." "Hello, Tyrant Malfurion." Isra habitually closed her eyes, a faint smile on her doll-like face. She nodded at the three of them as a sign of acknowledgement. Duque deliberately made his words vague. He did not know what the Azeroth plane would be like in this life. Duque shrugged and pouted, unconcerned. Everyone who is called a hero by the people is working hard to change the fate of destruction. This is why we are called heroes. As long as they had perseverance and could continuously strengthen the ranks of the Druids, they would definitely achieve this goal one day. Ultimate transformation spell was so willful and convenient. Medivh had once said, "The earth will eventually heal its wounds." This world tree was slowly recovering. The red line is a dangerous area. We must retreat as soon as possible. The blue line is a warning area. It is best not to go there without the awareness of sacrifice. Everything will wait until the space stabilizes. She didn't open her eyes, but it was a strange feeling as if she was staring at Duke with rapt attention. It was Isra. In the original history, Isra saw the future in a dream. When the Twilight Judgment came, the dragons would all die at the hands of Cromartis. And every dragon king would die beside the Wormrest temple. Even the corpse of Deathwing was stuck at the top of the temple. Duque felt much better on the spot. It had nothing to do with his identity. It was purely because Isra was taking care of him. Made him feel better. Got it? The two night elf leaders promised. Huff, huff, huff. It sounded like the sound of bellows in an old blacksmith shop, but opposite this sound was the collapse of the entire Mount Hyjal. No, it's not that simple. That was because I had seen 3 dreams. One was the Twilight Judgment, but it was not completely destructive in that half-baked judgment. The other was the end of the dragons. I don't want to talk about this dream. But the third dream was different. I saw you, Duke Marcus, affecting the entire world line. This was the fusion of space. Because the original history and the history in the game obviously diverged. Chapter 1788. The corners of Isra's mouth curled into a charming smile. The aura of the dream around her clearly expressed that she did not believe a word you said, but she maintained a polite smile on her face. Yes. But you're the only one I've seen who can directly affect the entire timeline. Isra tilted her head adorably. Although this did not match her sexy female elf persona, it was still quite cute. Is that so? Oh, ha ha. What else could Duque say? He kept laughing awkwardly and politely. Isra's face got closer. She looked serious, and her hands were crossed in front of her chest like she was praying devoutly. For a moment, Duque had the urge to flirt with her. In my original dream, the 5-colored guardian dragons were missing the earth because of Nesario's betrayal. I once had a hunch that the former chief, Thrall, would be the key. The power of the earth that he controlled was likely to fill our gap. And then? I woke up from my dream because I realized that Thrall's existence was not necessary. With Onyxia's addition, the magic array formed by the Pentashade dragon aspect could not be said to be perfect, but it was still quite smooth. So I entered the dream again. At this moment, I saw a dream that foreshadowed a different future. You saved us, the guardian dragons, one by one. Even if... There was another half of the sentence that Isra did not say, and that was, even if we lost the power bestowed by the Titans. Changing the topic slightly, Isra held Duque's hand with both hands. If possible, I am willing to bet everything on you on a better future. Unfortunately, I don't have anything that you want. I'm just sorry that this time, this responsibility that should have belonged to us has been forcibly separated and placed on you. Duque smiled, not noticing that Isra had already scanned his mind. It's okay, we're all old acquaintances. Anyway, my future is in Azeroth, and I am also a self-proclaimed guardian. Otherwise, the will of the planet would not have given me such high authority and upper limit. If there's anything you need, just tell me. Isra smiled very sincerely and sweetly, as if thousands of pear trees were blooming. I have awakened. I realized that there was more I could do for the world than my duty. I hope to organize a powerful team of guardians called Guardian Hyjal to protect the safety of the world. Oh. Duque wasn't surprised, but he had to act like tyrant. Due to the shaking of the foundation of the world, the Emerald Dream and the plane of the real world have been pulled closer. If I can get the help of more mortals, I can try to speed up the return of the demigods, including Cenarius. Cenarius. Tyrant and Malfurion exclaimed simultaneously. Isra had spoken her thoughts clearly. The true demigods of Azeroth were immortal beings. As long as the situation was right, they could be resurrected. There were 4 initial targets. The first was Goldring. Goldring was a demigod wolf god in the world of Azeroth. Goldring had killed countless demons in the ancient war 10,000 years ago. He only stopped fighting when he was exhausted. However, he didn't die and was one of the few demigods who survived. After that, Goldring still wandered the wilderness. His power was the reason for the curse of the werewolves, even though it wasn't his intention. After the cataclysm, the latest news was that the Twilight Hammer seemed to be trying to use other evil gods to replace Goldring. By the way, he was called Garrosh on the other side of the tribe. Yes, when Varian was a death gladiator in the Hammer of Misfortune, he had inherited the name of the Ghost Wolf. In a sense, Varian could even be said to be Goldring's son. The second was Arwenna, the messenger of the moon god. The mother of mercy, Arwenna, who was revered by the people, was a crow on Garnier, the mother tree in the world of Azeroth. Before the ancient war, Elune had taken a fancy to her and sent her to deliver a message to the demigod Cenarius. Not long after, as Arwenna also directly delivered messages to the other demigods, her honesty and speed were praised by everyone. In return, the demigods gave her more abilities to help her complete her mission faster and better. In the end, Arwenna herself became an existence like them, a demigod. When the Night Elves discovered the Well of Eternity and settled nearby, Arwenna transformed into a Night Elf. As one of the members of her race, she studied the magic power of the well water with them. However, Queen Azhara built her own temple and gathered a large number of servants to greedily absorb the magic power of the Well of Eternity. Arwenna soon realized the terrible effects of misusing magic, so she returned to Elune's side. During the ancient war, Arwenna would sometimes transform into the image of a mortal race to guide the humans or night elves who were being chased by the Doomsday Guards and help them escape danger. However, most of the time she would hover in the sky and scout, providing Cenarius with intelligence on the Burning Legion. Ronan, who had participated in the transmigration, witnessed Arwenna's fall. The Doomsday Guards discovered Arwenna, who was active at the front lines. A large number of demons focused on attacking the demigod's messenger. The Doomsday Guard's spears eventually pierced through Arwenna's body. Blood splattered on the ground, and the Burning Legion demons that came into contact with Arwenna's blood all fell. However, Ronan did not know that although the mother tree, Garnier, gradually withered, Arwenna survived. She once again flew across the battlefield. The news of the wild boar god Agamagam fighting 2 powerful Void Lords alone, crushing numerous Apocalypse guards even as it fell to the ground, the Bear Monster brothers User and Usoc being assassinated by a Mana Prowler, the White Deer Malorn fighting alongside the Dryad and falling to the ground alone was sent to Cenarius in a timely manner, and the news finally flew to the Moon God's residence. The third was the turtle demigod Tortola, whom the modern Night Elves did not know much about. As for the fourth, it was the forest demigod Cenarius, who was the center of attention. As a demigod who was hacked to death by Lord Roar's axe, Cenarius, in a sense, was quite pitiful. He did not know if Lord Roar had a fixed damage increase of 1000% against 4-legged centaurs. In any case, he would kill every 4-legged humanoid creature he hacked to death. Especially since Lord Roar had now joined Duque's side. Once they met again, the situation would be quite awkward. However, Duque, who was a troublemaker, would not let such a scene go. However, it sounded like Isra wanted to do something big. Chapter 1789. I hope to resurrect all the gods of the wilderness who died in the War of the Ancients as soon as possible, Isra said to Duque. The god of the wilderness was a very broad term. A long time ago in the vast world of Azeroth, there was a group of magical creatures. Most of them appeared in animal form, but they didn't need to experience life and death like ordinary creatures. Their abilities surpassed mortal creatures, and they even became the object of worship for some races. They were the gods of the wilderness. All the gods of the wilderness were demigods. Their essence was the powerful essence of life, representing life and nature. Their bodies existed in the material world, and their souls were bound in the emerald dream by Odur's guardian, Freya. In the ancient war, in addition to the 4 demigods mentioned above, there were actually more than 24 demigods. The more famous ones included the boar god Agamagan, the bear brothers Ushik and User, and the black panther demigod Amantha. Naturally, the most famous was the white deer god Malorn. In ancient times, Malorn was like an outstanding diplomat of his race. He could always resolve all kinds of conflicts. Legend has it that Malorn's magic power was boundless, but he never abused it. He was elegant, wise, magnanimous, and tolerant, using his love for the world of Azeroth to maintain its peace and tranquility. Before the War of the Ancients, whenever the world or the Night Elf civilization faced danger, Malorn the Wayfarer would appear in the form of a giant white deer to help the Night Elves. Although he had powerful magic, he never appeared in other forms. Malorn often strolled along the road of Azeroth, resolving all kinds of wars and disputes in his own way. He had avoided 2 civil wars among the Night Elves. In the War of the Ancients, Cenarius asked Malorn and the other demigods of Azeroth to participate in the war against the Burning Legion. After a heated debate, Cenarius convinced them to join forces under the command of Jared Shadowsong, who led the Night Elf army and other creatures against the Burning Legion. In order to save his son Cenarius, Malorn used his great power to charge at the Burning Legion alone and engulfed the demon army. Seeing that Malorn was gradually flattening his army, Archherons rushed out to fight Malorn in order to prevent his army from being completely destroyed. White Deer, who had used up a lot of energy in the previous battle, attacked him with all his might, but Archimonde used his powerful evil power to defeat Malorn and break his neck. Duque had eaten a whale. He knew that the dragon race had a huge appetite, and this whale-eating method was quite shocking to him. As the saying goes, you can't become fat in one bite. Duque felt that this saying was quite reasonable. If it was done step by step, he would raise all 5 limbs in approval. What troubled Duque the most was that Isra had set his sights on him. Duque, I know that reviving so many demigods in one go is indeed a huge project. If it's you, you should have a way, Isra said. Duque rolled his eyes. *CK, you can't even say it's daytime. Or is this a test? Duque shook his head deeply. I'm sorry. Perhaps many beings see me as a prophet, as a guide. In reality, I'm not omniscient. No one is like that. Nozdormu can't, just like the titans of the Pantheon didn't expect Sargeras to betray them. I only specialize in my own field. Clearly, reviving demigods isn't my forte. I see. Isra seemed a little disappointed. Duque bowed slightly. If there's anything I can help with, I'll do my best. I'm sorry if it's beyond my abilities. Especially Malorn. As the strongest demigod of the wilderness, reviving him requires a lot of power, and natural power at that. Although I've dabbled in that aspect, I don't think it's something that you and I can do directly. Why don't we set a small goal first, like reviving Cenarius, whose power is far inferior to his? Isra pulled himself together again, a simple and elegant smile with a hint of sweetness on his face. I was rash. In that case, who do you think should we revive first? Goldrin. Duque said without hesitation. All right. And so, Duque, Isra, Tyrant, and Malfurion began to discuss how to revive these demigods. Some demigods had indeed died in the ancient war. Some hadn't. The so-called revival of the demigods who hadn't died was more like a return to the source of their power. Isra said, Goldrin didn't die, but his soul seems to have split. We have to find his main body first. Malfurion frowned. I received news that the Twilight Hammer is afraid of Goldrin's power. They don't want to see Garrosh return to the world. So they summoned their own wolf god, an existence that was distorted and misunderstood by their will. In reality, they used this non-existent spiritual body to contaminate Goldrin's main body, so that he would enter the ranks of the evil gods. Tyrant continued, Are you talking about the corrupted, frenzied Wolverine Soth? Yes. However, I don't know how to lure this frenzied Wolverine Soth out. Duque suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. That's easy. The original method in the game was naturally for the players to find those werewolves who were desecrating the holy altar of Garrosh, kill them, obtain a batch of special incense, and then lure out frenzied Wolverine Soth. However, the Land of Fire had yet to officially merge with Azeroth, and the Twilight Hammer's operation had yet to begin. If they wanted to bring Goldrin back in advance, they would have to use special methods. As soon as Duque opened the portal, the people on the other side were shocked. Then Duque called out, "Come, my king, there's a small matter that I need you to run. I'm in the middle of a military conference." But all right. At the next moment, everyone on Mount Hygel saw the helpless William and the other two. When Duque told William about this, William's heart suddenly jumped strangely. It was a kind of joy that seemed to yearn to return to the source. When he was in the Hammer of Misfortune, he was always respectfully called Garrosh by the orcs. However, when he had the opportunity to personally interact with this wolf demigod, he felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had met his father. Duque patted William's shoulder affectionately. "William, although the power of frenzied Wolverine Soth is nothing compared to Goldrin's main body, this beast must be eliminated first. But he had to destroy this beast first before the real Goldrin could return. Isra has already sensed the location of that thing. Go to the throat of Lycansoth in the east of here. As long as you go in, this beast will come out on its own. Get rid of it and free Goldrin's soul." Chapter 1790. William had completely matured. As he grew older and had more battle experience, he was the majestic and authoritative king of Stormwind in front of almost everyone. In the eyes of the people and soldiers, William's bravery and achievements had completely surpassed that of his father, Lang. In many battles, William had proven his strength and ability to command troops. At the same time, because the Marcus family supported the economy of Stormwind, a certain titular duke who had environmental awareness and modern economic knowledge made the kingdom truly prosperous. These 2 points made everyone have a unanimous evaluation of William, a holy king that only appeared once in 1,000 years. Regardless of whether he was a holy king or not, the relationship between William and Duque was rather complicated. In terms of seniority, Duque was of the same generation as William's father and uncle Anduin Lothar, whom he admired the most. Duque was indeed active before he became a minor. Even though Duque was only 7 or 8 years older than him, which was not even half a generation, William still had to call Duque uncle. In terms of status in the mortal world, William was a king, while Duque still had the title of Grand Duke of Stormwind. The problem was that no one would mention this title again. The queens of the 4 kingdoms were all going to marry Duque at the same time. How could they come to Stormwind to be duchesses? Sorry, the pond was too small to hold so many big fish. In terms of power in the kingdom, Duque was not only outstanding, but also extremely powerful. Think about it. If it were a normal king, he would have a duke who was a demigod, a bunch of demigods and hundreds of thousands of troops, an army of millions of foreign races including insects, nagas, murlocs and so on. How could a king sleep well? In the past, Lang had thought of separating from Duque, and William had once thought that it might be a good thing. Now that the alliance's economy was integrated, how could they be separated so easily? The Marcus family's territory, or in other words, its jurisdiction included the East Elven Forest, the East Twilight Forest, the Reedridge Mountain, the Swamp of Sorrow, and the Headwind Path. Many lands that were once considered barren were now producing large amounts of minerals, which were the mainstays of Stormwind's industry. If the Marcus family were to be separated, then how would they go to the Watch Castle in the Cursed Land? Most importantly, without Duque, Stormwind would no longer be the leader of the Alliance. To be the boss of such a strong organization like the Alliance, there were so many benefits. Moreover, Duque himself was an immortal demigod. Not only him, but even Queen Sylvanas was a demigod. Perhaps Jaina would also embark on the path of demigods in the future. Did he really have to offend a whole family of demigods? After thinking about it, William and his courtiers came to a conclusion. Let's just make do with it. If it was appropriate, he could simply merge the Wurine family and the Marcus family through marriage. The poor little Prince Anduin Wurine still didn't know that his father had already plotted to make him a bachelor dog until Annihilus Marcus grew up. Originally, William had always been very conflicted when he met Duque. In public, William would call Duque Commander-in-Chief, and when there were no outsiders, he would call him Duque. As for Duque calling him William, he was also happy to accept it. But now that he was a newbie to Duque and was ordered to do the task of running errands and killing small monsters, William was in a bind. Yet, Duque still had his lifeline because that was his Goldrin, which was also Garrosh. William had inherited Lang's terrible bloodline, which was considered second-rate. Yet, he was able to explode and rise to become the Alliance's top berserker in one go. This had a great deal to do with Garrosh's soul inheritance. If he could gain the recognition of the real wolf god, his strength might even be able to take a leap and become a demigod. After understanding his own situation, William could only pinch his nose and accept it. Goldrin has done me a great favor, and it's my wish to liberate his soul. I'll go back to Stormwind to hand over some state affairs. I'll go now. Do well. The smelly Duque put on the airs of an elder and encouraged William, making Tyron want to laugh but not dare to. Since Magni wasn't around, William was already the number 2 figure in the alliance, but he was like a grandson in front of Duque. Even though he knew that Duque had the intention of teasing him, William had no choice but to jump into this pit. He really didn't know if this was a sign that he was going to be under Duque's control for the rest of his life. After getting rid of William, the next topic of discussion was naturally the crow demigod Avi. Oh Avina. I used to blame that damned input method when I played games in the past. In the end I ended up typing her name into this. It's a sin. Duque didn't have any special plans or arrangements for this crow demigod. After all, these resurrected demigods weren't too strong. Although they weren't as strong as those wilderness demigods who didn't even leave their names behind, they were actually not as good as Onyxia. She was a strong support for mortals, but she was at most a bonus for Duque. Anyway, they just had to kill Cecilia, the Twilight Dragon, who wasn't even considered a boss. Out of the idea of training the younger generation or guiding them, Duque directly threw this task to Alucia, Sally Whitemane, Mara for Dragon, and some other second-rate powerhouses. If a group of girls learned to ride the hippogriffs that Avina had inherited, it would be quite pleasing to the eye. As for the tortoise demigod, Tortola, he was actually one of the few demigods who had survived the ancient war. Because this war had consumed too much of his energy, he chose to live in seclusion in Mount Hyjal. This sleep lasted for as long as 10,000 years, and he didn't even wake up during the Third War until the Cataclysm woke him up. The funny thing was that because he had just woken up and wasn't ready, Tortola was subdued and imprisoned by the Twilight Hammer. Now the task of this empty shell, guardian of Hyjal, that Isra had set up was to rescue him. Duke knew that Tortola, who had been rescued, would not only personally assist everyone in fighting against the Fire Elemental Legion, but even his children would also step forward to do their part. But as an old player, Duque knew how annoying Tortola's annoying sons and grandsons were. Forget it. Such a troublesome task would be left to Lena Thunderspear and the other newbies. Summoning the short and fat female dwarf paladin Lena and the others, Duque deceived them with a serious face. The Cataclysm has happened, and the Alliance and even the whole of Azeroth are facing another life-and-death crisis. In the name of the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, I give you a sacred task. Let the tortoise demigod, who fought against the Burning Legion in the ancient war and fell into a state of weakness for 10,000 years, return. The newbies, who didn't know that Duque was only throwing the task to them because he was afraid of trouble, were all excited by the encouragement from the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, the legendary hero Duque. They couldn't wait to go to the battlefield the next moment. Chapter 1791. We'll definitely complete the mission. Lena and the others were extremely excited. On the side, Isra, who still had his eyes closed, chuckled after they left. Duque, you're not very kind. Why do I feel like you've foreseen all the future and made the corresponding arrangements? You even optimized the allocation of manpower. Duque immediately exclaimed in his heart. Women? Oh, it's not good for a female dragon to be so smart. Look at how smart Onyxia is. She immediately went offline after following me. Isn't she a dumb dragon with dumb luck now? Duque would never admit this. The enemy hasn't come out yet. Of course I have to reserve some mobile troops and a certain number of strong people to deal with emergencies. It was a very fair and reasonable statement, but Isra looked like he had Duque in the bag. Reviving Cenarius is my and Malfurion's mission. Reviving so many forest gods is a heavy burden even for me. Then can I ask you, Duque, to help purify the Bear brothers Ushik and User? They seem to have been revived again, and then there's a problem. I don't know where they are now. User was a shaman caster, while Ushik was a warrior who excelled at using fangs and claws. When the two worked together in battle, their combination of strength and magic could quickly eliminate any enemies that blocked their way. User and Ushik were the protectors of all beasts and people who believed in the balance of nature. The brothers' most loyal followers were bear monsters, whose magic tradition came from User's shamanism. Some bear monsters inherited Ushik's style of wood carvings and architecture. The Timbermaw Fortress in the north of Fellwood Forest was an example. The entrance to the fortress was a huge, roaring bear's head carved out of wood, a sign of respect for the twin bear brothers. The Night Elves were also followers of the bear brothers User and Ushik. They dedicated their lives to the immortals and obtained the form of a bear, the Claw Druid. Every druid who followed the path of the bear had to go through a ritual to communicate with the soul of the giant bear in the moonlight forest. The followers of the twins had always looked forward to the day when they would find the casks of their ancestors or the wooden carvings of their patron. In this life, the bear monsters living near the world tree Vordrasil in the Grizzly Hills had indeed begun to replant the broken Vordrasil. They had intended to resurrect the great bear god Ushik who had died in the ancient war. In the end, Ushik was resurrected by the bear monsters, but it was precisely because the ancestors of the night elves planted the world tree Vordrasil, that their roots were so deep that they even reached the lair of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. The dark power of the ancient gods began to leak. The druids were afraid that Vordrasil would cause a great disaster, so they destroyed the world tree. The result of his resurrection was naturally that Ushik had been contaminated by the ancient god. With the help of the adventurers, some of the bear monsters used the purified dust of Vordrasil to purify Ushik. But what happened next was rather interesting. He really didn't know if he should say that the bear monsters were awesome, or that the bear monster brothers' soul abilities were awesome. Before attacking Otter, Ushik had experienced a failed resurrection, and his soul was purified and returned to the Emerald Dream. In less than a year, the bear monsters actually had a resurrection ritual again. This time they resurrected two brothers at once. Then, for some reason, something went wrong again. Thinking of this, Duque couldn't help but touch his chin. Interesting. After estimating the difficulty, Duque agreed and only raised a question. What if I reach a certain degree of cooperation with the brothers? Duque's words were very vague, but Isra seemed to have expected it. She smiled slightly. We, the dragon aspect, have the same goal as you, Duque. There has never been any division between us. Since we have to rely on your power to resurrect the bear monster brothers, if they choose to become your servants, there is nothing wrong with that. We respect the choice of every spirit of nature and god of the wilderness. Isra added. Also, I'm worried that the Ushik brothers may have been contaminated by an unknown soul, and resurrection of them may not be successful. There may even be the possibility that they have become evil gods. If such an unfortunate event occurs, you will also need to suppress it. So, I'll leave everything to you. Sigh. As expected of a good and understanding girl. Oh, what a good dragon. Duque's thoughts suddenly became active. Frankly speaking, the configuration of his demigod team was indeed a bit biased. There were many long-range fighters, few melee fighters, and they were unreliable. Originally, there was still the Sword Emperor who could help, but now the Gemini were temporarily defeated, and Duque had yet to find a way to resurrect them. Onyxia only liked to fight hand-to-hand with enemies that were weaker than her. Now, there was a bunch of demigods, but they ended up meeting a demigod who was strong in melee combat. His side was in a complete mess, unable to display their combat power. The most obvious example was the last time they fought Arthas. Although the two fools were very strong, the Black Dragon, Queen Sylvanas, and Gavashki, three demigods who were not weak, could not even fight the two fools in a short period of time. It was a huge embarrassment. Now that Isra had opened the door, Duque naturally accepted it. The Land of Fire was currently merging with the main plane of Azeroth. It was said that there was still some time before it would happen, but the problem was that no one dared to guarantee when Ragnaros's subordinates and the blind believers of Twilight would launch an all-out attack. Duque had never set his sights on the Bear Brothers because Duque knew that the god of the wilderness was unruly and difficult to tame, and they were a faction of their own. As the leader of the Logia faction, nothing he did would be for nothing. If he worked so hard to resurrect them and then ran away with a word of thanks, where would he put his face? Deep down, Duque was still a player who would not get up without benefits. Now it was different. The Logia faction only had the three leaders, Malorn the White Deer, his son Cenarius, and Isra who raised Cenarius. Isra nodded. Even if the other two didn't like it, they could only pinch their noses and accept it. Moreover, Duque was very clear that if there were no accidents, Ushik should have fallen at this point in time. Even if his soul was purified, he would not be too strong after returning. Reconstructing the divine body of a demigod was never an easy task. Isra had to resurrect 4 demigods in one go, and even hoped to resurrect Malorn. Without using up all the energy accumulated in Mount Hyjal and the Emerald Dream, there was absolutely no hope of completing it. Rather than that, it was better to let the landlord's surname do have it. Duque, who had clearly profited, righteously expressed his willingness to fight for the future and peace of Azeroth while opening the portal and going straight to work. For others, finding the Bear Brothers was like looking for a needle in a haystack. As for Duque, pretending to think, he directly opened the portal to the Amber Pinewood camp in Grizzly Hills in Northrend. Chapter 1792. Half a year ago, a great war between the living and the undead ended. The once bustling North region returned to peace. Although the Alliance still had more than 50,000 soldiers in Northrend, everyone knew that only the guards were left. The main force of the Alliance had already withdrawn. The fearless fortress was left on the western front, and Stormwind opened up Ziyuan County to exploit the mineral resources there. Of course, most of the land in the North Wind Taiga was still used as a hunting ground for the Blue Dragons. The Eastern Alliance had slightly more troops. The dwarf General Fandral Thunderspear and the Lordaeran General Bridget Abendis occupied the Howling Fjord and Grizzly Hills on behalf of the two countries. In general, the mines belonged to the bronze-bearded dwarves, while the plains and highlands belonged to Lordaeran. It was interesting for General Thunderspear to come here because there would be no more Alterac Mountains battlefield in this life. As for Bridget, it was purely because she wanted to change her mood. A man she admired had disappeared at the same time as her father. Staying in Lordaeran, she would always think of him. On the surface, the three countries of the Alliance had taken an enclave, but no one knew what would happen in the future. As one of the three warmer areas in Northrend, the resources here were actually not bad. Because of the continuous wars, and the great cataclysm that had just ended, the Alliance did not have much energy to focus on the development here. The only ones who did their best were the Night Elf Druids. Amber Pinewood Camp was a camp built on the side of a large river. The rapid river could send huge logs from the Blue Sky sawmill downstream to the Bay of Risk in the southwest of Grizzly Hills, where they would be loaded onto ships. Then they would be sent to places in Northrend that needed wood. Once upon a time, the higher-ups of the Alliance thought of selling the wood here to Orgrimmar, which lacked wood. Later, because of Gursa's rise to power, the Alliance and the Horde stopped trading. Although the Pinewood Camp belonged to Stormwind City, many druids used it as a base to explore the entire Grizzly Hills. When an unauthorized portal broke through Pinewood Camp's solidified space barrier, it caused panic among the guards, but when Duke's figure appeared in front of everyone quieted down and saluted Duke with the Alliance's military salute. "Is Teacher Syrian here?" Duke asked softly. A female night elf with shoulder-length white hair and large face lines on her face walked out. "I am Syrian, but in front of Sir Marcus, who is known as the Alliance's mentor, I am ashamed. I don't deserve to be called a teacher." Duque smiled like a spring breeze. "Everyone has their own specialties. I'm only the commander of the Alliance, but in terms of restoring nature, you druids are the teachers of all the Alliance." Duque's humility made many people, including Syrian, feel very comfortable. "I wonder what business Sir Marcus has here? Have you heard from Ushik and User recently?" The elven tutor suddenly became excited. "Have the higher-ups of the Alliance finally received my report? Oh my god. I've been typing my report for 3 months. Fortunately, Sir Marcus has personally come to deal with this matter." That's right. The Bear brothers were demigods. A powerful demigod should be dealt with by a demigod. I actually thought that the Alliance would need to form another hero group. Duque broke into a cold sweat. This was his fault. In fact, he should have seen Ushik's report. To be more precise, his system elf had seen it. The problem was that Duque, who was waiting for the cataclysm to happen, had secretly lowered the priority of everything in Northrend to the lowest level. This meant that unless an important stronghold was attacked, the system elf did not need to remind Duque about anything in Northrend. After all, in Duque's view, Northrend had the Sleeping Dragon Temple and the new Lich King Uther overseeing it. So Duque did not care. He just took a few glances, allocated some resources, and fooled around with his maid. Of course, since Syrian mentioned it, Duque easily found Syrian's report in the system's saved file. Duque replied confidently, "It can't be helped. In your report and the other reports, there is no direct evidence that the demigod Bear brothers have been resurrected, and there are no eyewitnesses. If it wasn't for your recent report that the bear monsters around Vorderthil are getting more and more violent, and they are constantly fighting each other and endangering the surrounding environment, such as the wooden house in Amber Pine Forest. The Alliance has invested a lot of troops in this, but the number of incoherent injured people is increasing. Neither the Alliance's staff nor I will pay attention to what's happening here." Syrian immediately became discouraged. "I'm sorry, Sir Commander. It was indeed our investigation that failed. It's okay. I'm here because of this. The Land of Fire is descending on Mount Hyjal. If we can add another demigod in time, it will be a good thing." Syrian pondered for a moment. "I'm not sure about Ushik and Uther, but I can say with certainty that part of the bear monsters in Grizzly Hills have been contaminated again. This once peaceful race is now divided into 2 factions. One faction supports Ushik, and the other supports Uther. They are actually killing each other. You should know that the god they worship is a brother who fought alongside them in the ancient war. Do you have any suggestions? I suggest that you look for Ushik's children. Osorn is in the Temple of Raging Teeth in the east of here, and Kadian is in the Temple of Blood Fury further east. Perhaps you can get more information about the Bear Brothers from them. Of course, Duque knew the entire process of Ushik's resurrection quest, but he could forget about it now. That was not the case at all. He came to Pinewood Camp to look for Syrian. Firstly, he had indeed received her report, and secondly, she was the initiator of Ushik's quest in the game. If he looked for her, who had been paying attention to the bear monsters, he would definitely get twice the result with half the effort. That was indeed the case. Through Syrian, Duque obtained the exact coordinates of the two temples. Duque went straight to them. He was a little surprised to find that Ushik's children were together in the Temple of Raging Teeth. Osorn was a big white bear and Kadian was a big brown bear. Well, they were just a little bit bigger. They were about the size and tonnage of a 50-ton medium tank. Duque easily found out about the Bear Brothers. So it was the Timbermaw bear monster's fault. To be precise, it was the actions of the Alliance and the Horde that provoked the Timbermaw bear monster. This involved a bear monster named Thor Rageclaw. Chapter 1793. In the world of Azeroth, there were actually quite a number of intelligent creatures. Sometimes it was just like that. Races with higher intelligence and a larger population would often occupy an absolute ruling position. For example, on Earth before Duque crossed over, humans had already unified the world. Any other species of creatures were only fit to enter zoos. Among the three known continents, apart from the Pandaria continent, which was located south of the Endless Sea, the Alliance, the Horde, and the Dragons gradually occupied the absolute dominant positions of these three continents. The Dragons only cared about their own territory. This made it very difficult for the other intelligent races that did not join the Alliance and the Horde. For example, the Centaurs who were once active in the southern part of Duroder, were almost extinct and had to migrate to the wilderness of the Barren Lands to survive. In the Razor Highlands in the southern part of the Barren Lands, the Boarmen were also killed by the Orcs. If it wasn't for the cataclysm that attracted the brain-dead Howl and the main force of the Horde, the Boarmen would probably have been killed to extinction. Therefore, the second-tier races such as the Bear Monsters and the Boarmen were in an awkward position, but they also desperately wanted to increase their strength. Because of the Bear Monsters' relationship with Urso, the Night Elves had always allowed a group of bear monsters to live in Timbermaw Fortress in the northern part of the Fellwood Forest. After all, many elven druids still had to learn how to become a bear from a claw druid. The Horde did not have this scruple. After all, the bear monsters did not join the Alliance, so they were targets. After Dranos Salyafar became the new leader of the Forsaken, he chose to rebuild the new Undercity. At the same time, he also led his men to attack all the living in Winterspring. After Mook had people throw a magic bomb into the new underworld city, the goblins of Winterspring Valley's perpetual moon town chose to evacuate. Now, there were no other intelligent races to hinder the expansion of the Forgotten Ones. This made the life of the Timbermaw bear monsters even more difficult. This was almost equivalent to the Timbermaw bear monsters fighting a mutated version of the Scourge army. Thor Rageclaw chose to resurrect the demigod bear monsters again and two at once. His idea was good, and it was supported by the rest of the bear monster clans in Grizzly Hills. They also learned their lesson this time and used the purified dust of Vordrasil as a material to summon Urso and Urso. His intentions were good. But the naive bear monsters didn't expect that Twilight believers had already filled every intelligent race, including the bear monsters. Since Enzos could make Savi's corrode Fandral Staghelm, why couldn't he tempt some bear monsters with low intelligence? Everything was well prepared, but the animals used as resurrection sacrifices were all fed with corroded morning light oats. On the surface, these were all light element fodder. If one ate too much of it, the sacrifice's internal organs would all be marked with Enzos mark. That was why the demigod brother of the bear monster that was resurrected after exhausting the life force of Vordrasil, which had been broken into 3 parts, was still mentally ill. Ushik's son Aolang said, "Father and uncle, the brothers saw an illusion." He shouted that the other party was a monster whose soul had been corrupted by the demons of the Burning Legion. I'm afraid that their memories are still stuck in the ancient war from 10,000 years ago, where they saw a terrifying illusion. His daughter, Koshien, said, "The scariest thing is that almost all the bear monsters and giant bears with fathers and uncles' bloodline have been affected. They are frantically attacking their compatriots in the other camp. Because Grizzly Hills was once controlled by the Lich King's Scourge Legion, the plague still lingers in many places. We can see that many giant bears have fought to the death, but they are still dragging their immortal bodies to attack each other. Speaking up to here, the two big black bears shrunk back without feeling the cold. Duque touched his chin and he began to understand Enzo's approach. Because Ushik's soul had already been purified once, forcibly contaminating Ushik's soul didn't show. The evil faction's method of making the righteous fall seemed to be the same after so many years, and that was the blood and souls of their loved ones. In order to make Arthas fall, Nazul induced Arthas to have a mental breakdown and then killed his father and master. In order to make Nesario fall, Enzos first used the whispers of the ancient gods to drive Nesario crazy, and then made him betray his brothers and sisters. The fetters of family were great. After personally cutting off these fetters, the sense of guilt and depravity brought about was also the darkest. In order to make the two powerful gods of the wilderness fall, Enzos had put in quite a bit of effort. It seemed that it was about right. Taking advantage of the fact that the Emerald Dream was approaching and the demigod resurrection became easier, he first instructed the Twilight believers in the bear monsters to offer sacrifices with added ingredients to the bear monsters, and then manipulated their soul perception, treating them as demons of the Burning Legion. Once one side slaughtered too many of the other's children and grandchildren, or a winner was decided in a battle to the death between the brothers, then the victor would wake up in extreme fear and shock, realizing what a terrible thing he had done. At that time, whether it was Ushik or Ushik who fell to become an evil god, Enzos would benefit. Ah! What an unexpected development. Duque sneered. The big white bear Ao Lang had an extremely anthropomorphic expression on his bare face. Please, great demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus, I have seen my father's fall and loss of composure once again. The current Ushik is no longer my great father, he must be sent to eternal slumber. The big brown bear, Koshien, also had a mournful expression. I had thought that purification would be enough to save my father. I was wrong. It was foolish to have such hopes. Great demigod, when you see my father and uncle, you will agree with me. If you see the torture my father has suffered again and again, that unparalleled darkness, you should have the same opinion as me. If their souls cannot rest in peace, then let them be annihilated. Seeing the two big bears in despair, Duque suddenly felt like laughing. What if I say that I still have a chance to save your father and uncle, and let them truly resurrect and join the righteous cause of fighting against evil? How will you thank me? Ushik and his children were stunned. As the children of a demigod, they had long since surpassed the scope of ordinary living beings, and were through and through divine beings. They were not at the level of a demigod, but they could live for tens of thousands of years. They had long since become spirits. How could they not hear Duque's intention to extort them, or rather to recruit them? Looking around, the entire Grizzly Hills had already become a territory controlled by the Alliance. If they did not know what was good for them, who knew if they would give the Alliance the chance to wipe them out? After all, many of their compatriots had already entered a state of madness. As long as you can save father and uncle, we are willing to become your servants, the siblings replied. Chapter 1794. Taking in bear monsters and giant bears as vassal races of the Alliance was purely Duque's impromptu idea. But it was also in line with the general trend of the world. This world didn't have the technology to fight cloning wars. Among the mainstream races, even humans and orcs, who had the shortest lifespans, needed more than 10 years to produce a new generation. The next, Legion strikes, would probably be less than 10 years away. To meet the needs of the upcoming war, the most basic method was to accept more large intelligent races. Just like in the beginning of World of Warcraft, the Alliance and the Horde each had only 4 races. In the end, both sides desperately expanded the number of races and developed more classes. Brainless Roar's method of attacking neutral races was, in a sense, cutting off his own path of retreat. Thrall had seen through this. Unless it was a race that couldn't be negotiated with, he wouldn't do anything to exterminate the intelligent races. The orcs were indeed powerful, but if they destroyed a large intelligent race this year and another the next year, what would the other races that joined the Horde think? Duque silently watched Brainless Roar court death and then waited for the right time to come. That was a bit off topic, but at this stage Duque had to deal with the demigod bear brothers first. Led by Ao Lang and his sister, Duque came to the giant rock hills northeast of the Grizzly Hills. This was a very remote place. When they attacked the Scourge army, the Moon Creek Brigade under Stormwind was stationed on the open land southwest of this place. After Arthas' death, the camp was empty. Northrend was very big, no smaller than the Eastern Kingdom continent or the Kalimdor continent. It was such a big continent. Excluding the Dragon Clan's territory, It was a joke for more than 50,000 Alliance troops to control a new territory of millions of square kilometers. Even the so-called occupation was just a symbolic one. If any major forces were to attack, the Alliance army would only retreat to the Fearless Fortress and Utgard Castle, which were vital areas, and wait for reinforcements. The giant rock hills weren't a place patrolled by the Alliance's sentinels, so it was normal that the Alliance didn't know about it. As soon as he stepped on this hill that looked like a small plateau, Duque heard earth-shaking roars. That was not the roar of one or two giant bears. It was the roar of thousands of bear monsters and giant bears. The exaggerated sound waves seemed to have materialized. Even with the explosive tonnage of the two giant bears behind him, they couldn't help but stagnate in front of this terrifying sound waves. Duque knew something was wrong with one look. On this small plateau, there was a huge basin similar to the ancient Roman Colosseum. It was at least 2 kilometers in diameter at the top and no less than 1 kilometer at the bottom. The entire slope of the basin was filled with bear monsters and giant bears. They were like spectators in an arena, roaring loudly and cheering for the battle between the two behemoths in the arena. Obviously, the two giant bears that were the size of hills were the brothers Yusak and User. Mortals would not be able to see anything, but as a demigod who was adept at controlling the elements, how could Duque not see the blood-colored web in the air? It extended out from a shattered, pitch-black space and covered the basin below. At the bottom of the basin, it looked like a patch of green grass. But Duque could see that the raging fire elements were like cirrus clouds in the stratosphere, churning and surging. If one looked at the bottom of the basin, one would see that the shadow elements that reeked of blood had formed a whirlpool. It glowed with an ominous light while a huge and complicated magic formation that covered the entire bottom of the basin slowly rotated in an anti-clockwise direction. What was even more terrifying was that this dark magic formation was spread out in a place that mortals could not see. Under the feet of at least 30,000 bear monsters, it stretched out in all directions, extending into the endless darkness. Yet, not a single bear monster or giant bear noticed the abnormality here. They continued to roar in a frenzy, completely unaware that their life force had been soundlessly extracted, forming a mysterious glow in the air before being absorbed into the evil magic formation. How extravagant! Even Duque had to admit that the evil god N'Zoth was really creative. The world was too big. No matter how strong the alliance was, no matter how many experts there was a limit to how many places they could take care of. After failing to attack the alliance's important territory, he switched to encircling the city from the countryside. He accumulated strength in a corner that the alliance could not see, and when necessary he would throw out all his cards in one go to crush the alliance. Duque could not help but recall that in history, be it Deathwing or Savi's, even if they had knelt down, N'Zoth had never jumped out to fight when his underlings were slapped in the face. In Azeroth, Enzos was definitely the most cunning. Lord Marcus? The big white bear Aolang asked nervously. Duque watched this scene quietly. Around him, the light of the magic net silently lit up, making his cheeks purple. If not for Duque's human appearance, he might have been mistaken for Adrenii. Atish and Song of Light and Shadow were clenched in his left and right hands respectively. His magic staff was pointed at the ground, and the tip of the sword drooped down. A golden line extended from the tip of the sword to the ground. The holy golden light was already overflowing, dripping drop by drop on the Boulder Hills grassland. Every drop of golden light flickered faintly. 3 different colored elements flowed in Duque's eyes. Blazing fire elements. Tranquil and serene frost elements. Mysterious and unfathomable arcane elements. Duque raised his right hand and flipped his wrist lightly. The atmosphere around him suddenly changed. Blizzard. Any Morning Star wizard could cast this spell. However, when a demigod used it, it was a true blizzard that affected the entire world. The temperature suddenly dropped. The frenzied bear monsters subconsciously looked at the sky that had been incomparably clear just a moment ago. At this time, the huge icicles as thick as a man's arm had already fallen from the sky. These icicles were like a sudden meteor shower, but each icicle was shining brightly under the golden light. Duque's short hair suddenly became long. It was not that his hair had inexplicably grown long, but that every strand of his hair had become a channel for him to communicate with the elements of heaven and earth. They extended from his head and connected to the void. It looked as if Duque had suddenly turned into a handsome man with long blue hair. Duque floated to the edge of the basin, ignoring the tens of thousands of bear monsters that were looking at him. He smiled and looked at his bear brothers at the bottom of the basin, countless green runes falling from his eyes like a waterfall. It was a final inspection of his demigod bear brothers, who were likely to become his new underlings. Chapter 1795. Above the vortex above the basin, there was an even larger arcane energy vortex that covered the blood-colored web like a pot lid. The arcane energy vortex spun slowly, and in its deepest depths, there were specks of golden light flashing continuously. Those specks of golden light seemed to be responding to their owner's thoughts. The light was like the sunlight that had shone on the Azeroth plains for thousands of years. It did not shine with the colors of cruelty and slaughter, but only calmness and matter of fact. It was as if it was watching two children who had gone overboard. The bear monsters and giant bears who were watching the battle a moment ago felt their hearts stop beating at the same time the moment the icicles fell. It was as if the ventricles were beating prematurely, and the entire heart skipped a beat. They looked up in shock and saw a pair of typical human eyes appear in the larger purplish-blue vortex. They did not know that this was an illusory eye of energy created from Duque's eyes. They only knew that this pair of huge eyes suddenly opened, and in the next instant, a terrifying pressure descended from the sky, directly pressing down on the basin. Accompanied by the falling icicles, a powerful hailstorm swept through the entire basin in a clockwise direction. All the bear monsters grunted at the same time, and then they were swept up by this powerful hailstorm, flying in all directions like cannonballs. Roar! Roar! At the bottom of the basin, the two giant war bears were using all their means to kill this powerful demon, who was actually their brother. User and Yusak's souls had been completely confused, and their spirit vision was no longer normal. Under the influence of the dark power, Duque was also an evil existence in their eyes. Unfortunately, Duque had long been prepared for this. The Song of Light and Shadow, in Duque's right hand crazily cut at the dark magic formation in the air. Bathed in holy golden light, Duque could not be twisted into any evil existence. However, Enzatha's mental hypnosis and soul corruption were not so simple. In the next instant, in the eyes of the two bear monsters, Duque was restored to a human. Unfortunately, he was a human from 10,000 years ago, still in the state of savages. Just like how city dwellers could not stand country bumpkins. Civilized people could not stand barbarians who ate raw meat and drank blood. What were the humans in the ancient war? They were existences akin to ants. Anyone who was bitten by an ant or even accidentally tripped by a chain reaction would feel ashamed and indignant. When the bear brothers were hit by the icicles in the sky and began to slow down, their already fuzzy consciousness was filled with such anger. There was nothing strange about it. Bear monsters were easily emotional creatures and could easily fall into a state of rage. To the bear monster, the god of the wilderness, the most simple and direct rule of the wilderness was the survival of the fittest. In their eyes, weak existences were either equivalent to food or not worth mentioning. Now that they had been slapped in the face by an existence they looked down upon, it was only natural that their already uncontrollable rage was added to the flames. At the same time, they gave up their original targets, each other, and turned to rush towards Duque. Duque finally realized that Enzatha's method was truly ingenious. He did not simply carry out mental control. Instead, he cultivated a brand new human bear personality in the soul of a demigod of this level and encouraged it to devour the original bear personality. Because the new bear personality was just a bear personality extended from the main body's will, it was an existence that regained control of the divine body after its main will fell into a state of destruction, so there was no problem of adaptation at all. In a sense, this was also an excellent path to depravity. It could forcibly bend an upright and righteous bear. The Yusaks could not carefully determine whether Duque was a friend or a foe. In any case, they only knew that they were unbridled with anger. All of this was because of that damned insect, Duque, who obstructed them from destroying the Burning Legion's great demon. Die. The two giant bears spoke in the human language, and with a mix of angry roars they pounced over. Before they arrived, Duque could already feel two terrifying forces coming from the ground beneath his feet. They were so strong that there was no way to resist them. This was pure and absolute power, just like the power that Azeroth used to create the present Golden Age from the beginning of chaos. Facing them head-on would definitely lead to death. Duque was calm. There was no despair or panic on his face. The Bear Brothers were indeed the powerful demigod duo that had single-handedly beaten the entire Demon Legion into submission during the Ancient War. If not for the fact that the demons could turn invisible and successfully assassinate them. Perhaps only the Archerons would be able to suppress them. However, they also had a very obvious weakness. They relied too much on the ground. The two brothers were the most classic experts in combat on foot. Once they left the ground, they were nothing. Just as the two giant bear monsters were about to reach Duque, the ground 30 meters in front of Duque suddenly froze. A huge block of ice with an area of more than 3,000 square meters was flipped over by Duque's will. It was not a heaven and earth shattering, but it was even worse than heaven and earth shattering. The two giant bears were directly flipped over by the huge block of ice. The next second, Wuxia fell to the ground with all four legs facing the sky. At some point, Duque had already flashed over, and the Song of Light and Shadow, in his right hand, tapped on Wuxia's head. In an instant they communicated mentally. As expected, Enzo's violent dark will surged over and crashed into the barrier that Duque had constructed in his mind. The violent will was like a never-ending tsunami, crashing into the embankment of Duque's mind. Even with the combined will of Duque and Alonsis fail, Duque still suffered a heavy blow and spat out a mouthful of blood. However, it was all worth it. In the eyes of an outsider, Duque had already used the system elf to invade Wuxia's mind and erase the dark illusion. He also communicated with Wuxia in detail through mental communication. When Wuxia flipped over and pounced at Duque, Wuxia was the one who blocked him. Two black bears the size of small hills crashed into each other with the purest form of violence. Four front paws slammed into each other's shoulders. In just a single exchange, Wuxia's shoulders were already covered with a few ghastly scratches. Now's the time. Wuxia roared. Duque appeared on the back of Wuxia's neck as he had wished. This time, the golden holy sword pierced into the back of Wuxia's head. However, it was very controlled and it only pierced less than 3 centimeters into the skull. For a giant bear whose head alone was the size of a carriage, this was nothing. Wuxia's chaotic and violent eyes gradually became clear. Chapter 1796. My brother. Am I the one who did this? Heavens, what did I do? Uther looked at the horrifying bloodstains on his brother's shoulders and body, and immediately realized that it was his doing. This was not a flesh wound but a ruthless slap with the intent to kill, coupled with an ultimate elemental impact. Uther clearly remembered his chaotic madness moments ago. After he woke up, he felt the darkest sense of guilt, pain, and despair. No. My heavens! Your soul will be destroyed. User cried out in alarm. You speak as if your soul can survive this. Uther's huge bare face revealed an extremely human-like wry smile. Then, the two brothers turned their heads at the same time, showing an apologetic expression to Duque, who had flashed away and was standing in a triangle with them. I didn't expect the world to change so quickly. Powerful humans? We're very tempted by your proposal. But, it seems like our souls can't take it anymore. What a pity. Just as Duque stabbed Uther's head with Song of Light and Shadow, Duque had also completed a mental exchange with him. Now there was a more serious problem. The two demigod souls were in a worse state than expected. This was because, in a very short period of time for a demigod, Uther had been resurrected twice. This forced resurrection consumed a lot of soul force, especially Uther. The last time, his soul had been first contaminated, then purified, and returned to the Emerald Dream before being resurrected and contaminated again. This was like a person who had been injured and cut off rotten flesh to heal, but before new flesh could grow, more of the good flesh had rotted away. The result was naturally a mess. What was worse was that the two brothers' soul foundation, commonly known as the spirit base, was actually connected. This was a little like the twin emperors because their souls were connected, so were their injuries. Although this damage was not enough to completely destroy the brothers' souls, it was clearly part of Enzatha's plot. If their spirit base was greatly damaged, then the two brothers' souls would have to return to the Emerald Dream and recuperate for 1,000 years or even thousands of years without being contaminated. Only then would they have the opportunity to accept the next resurrection. Without a doubt, this would cause the Bear Demon Demigod brothers to not be able to make it to the upcoming battle in the Land of Fire, or even the return of armies at a later time. In that schemer's mind, it would be best if the Bear brothers fell, but even if they didn't, he couldn't let the Alliance or the God of the Wilderness benefit. Duque frowned deeply. Duque was now a demigod. As a demigod who was still connected to the weave, Duque's every action and thought could affect the entire weave. At that moment there was a gust of wind on the boulder hill. A strong wind with an elemental aura blew through the grass on the hill, causing rustling sounds. Countless withered leaves flew over the heads of the bear monsters. In the far east, the endless sea was sparkling. From the east to the west, the salty ocean wind passed through the hills and blew into the distance. At that moment, Duque saw the pleading look in the bear brothers' eyes. Actually, Duque could completely ignore the bear brothers. The Azeroth of this life was definitely much, much stronger than the original Azeroth in history. The bear monsters had courted death and resurrected USOC twice in a short period of time. Who could be blamed for this? But Duque could totally imagine that no matter how temporary the Burning Legion was, who would protect the bear monsters who had lost the protection of their demigod? This was the sorrow of a weak race. They couldn't even take care of themselves, so who would care about the friendship of the god of the wilderness when they joined forces to fight against the Burning Legion? Duque heard the leaves of a lonely tree not far from him creaking. He suddenly had a feeling. The current alliance was indeed stronger than it had been at the same point in history. What did they rely on? Wasn't it just pulling back experts who would have died or fallen at different points in time? This was like gathering sand to form a tower. Without those grains of sand, without those 20 years of hard work, how could they have the strength they had today, the strength of the alliance? Facing the gale of the apocalypse, a tree was indeed lonely. What about the forest? What about the dense and vast primeval forest? Duque could imagine that if he gave up at a certain point, perhaps this organization known as the Alliance, known as the Azeroth Grand Alliance, would be destroyed by an ant's nest. It wouldn't be long before he heard the roar of the City of Destiny in his heart collapsing. Duque let out a long breath. To you brothers, I have a suggestion. On the other side, the bear monsters and giant bears who had just been sent flying had already slowly climbed up from the ground. They didn't scatter in all directions, because the god they believed in and trusted was still fighting. But the scene had changed. The god of the bear monsters, who was invincible in their eyes, was actually hugging their archenemy, the devil. Yes, in their eyes, this was the most unbelievable thing. At this moment, the divine will that ruled over them came. Every bear or bear monster stopped on this former battlefield. They stood upright like humans, each bear head raised high and looked at the sky. The demigod brothers of the bear monsters were impressively in the sky. Yusak said immediately, "We've been deceived by the ancient evil god Enzoth." Yusak followed up, "There's no Burning Legion at this moment." As they spoke, their vision suddenly underwent the most intense change. A moment ago they had forgotten everything and couldn't hear or see anything else at all. Their entire souls had fallen into a false silence. At this moment, a brilliant, purple-blue arcane storm erupted in their vision. The storm set off a sky full of arcane missiles that moved in a clockwise direction. When the arcane missiles hit the sky collapsed. When they hit the ground changed color. When they hit the devil turned into a bear monster. It was a complete rewrite of the five senses. Originally, in their minds, they were in a terrible ancient battlefield, cheering for their demigods fighting against a demon lord. Unexpectedly, the entire world was taken over by a peaceful and familiar world in the next second. Their consciousness returned to the Grizzly Hills. The voices of the Yusak brothers resounded in their souls. Frankly speaking, your souls have been corrupted, and corrupted souls are difficult to redeem. I know that our next request is a bit excessive, but it is, to offer your souls to make up for our damaged souls. Chapter 1797. The result of this is that you will be completely annihilated in this world, unable to leave any trace of yourselves. As for us brothers, we will truly regain the freedom of our souls. We will probably seek refuge with Duke Marcus, the demigod of the Weave, and with the blessing of his elemental energy, we will participate in the upcoming war against evil. Just like what we did in the ancient war 10,000 years ago. At this point the USOC brothers choked. This was the method that Duque had proposed. Sacrificing the souls of the corrupted bears, extracting the pure soul energy from within to repair the souls of their brothers. This was a classic case of harming others for one's own benefit. But Duque had no better idea. Soul energy was a combination of spiritual energy and life energy. The corrupted part had to be cut out, and the remaining gap to be repaired could only be filled with souls. Duque was not a titan, and perhaps even a titan could not create a soul out of nothing. In a sense, the dark energy used by the Burning Legion was just a form of soul energy extracted through violent means. Duque could not sacrifice the souls and lives of other races to repair the souls of the demigod bear brothers. The only ones who could make the decision were the bears themselves. Whoa. Whoa. One of the bears began to howl at the sky, followed by 100, 1,000, 10,000, tens of thousands. As a human, Duque found it difficult to understand the thoughts of the bears and the bears. He could only be sure that they had made their decision. USOC and users spoke in unison. "We have made our decision. Please begin." It had been a long time since Duque used this method of harvesting souls. Even now he did not need to enter shadow form. With a point of his finger, the vortex made of weave energy in the sky began to spin. It became a true vortex that sucked in all rivers into the sea. But what it absorbed was souls. One by one, the ethereal and illusory bear spirits were easily stripped from their corpses that were beginning to rot. Almost at the instant the spirits left their bodies, their corpses on the ground rapidly shriveled up. What the vortex brought to them was true destruction. The terrifying slicing of the spirits caused them to involuntarily let out the most mournful wails of their souls. Then all the low cries of the souls disappeared. After losing the imprint of being an individual, when the darkness was swept away by the high-speed rotation, what was left in the sky was the purest form of soul energy. This soul energy was taken over by the whirlpool controlled by Duque. The energy was continuously mixed up, compressed again before passing through a huge golden magical formation net controlled by Alonce's Fail. In the end, the soul energy that seemed to connect the heavens and the earth split into two and entered Ushik and User's spirit bodies. Oh, cough. Even though Duque had already smashed the spirit into pieces, the two brothers could still clearly feel all the emotions contained in the soul fragments of their compatriots. It was a land that had been completely destroyed by depravity and destruction. Not a single blade of grass grew and the forests were scorched. It was a world without plants, a world where even herbivores could not survive. Without herbivores there were naturally no large carnivores like bears or bear monsters. It was the fear of hunger, the desire to survive. The most primitive instincts of animals were gathered in the soul fragments and merged with the souls of the two demigods. The fusion continued. At some point in time the two demigods were already crying. Two incomparably huge bear-shaped existences were shedding silent tears. This was a very strange scene. But Duque felt that he could understand that feeling. If it were him, he would have to sacrifice tens of thousands of humans to ensure his own survival in order to protect more humans. It would definitely not be a good feeling. Soon, all the soul energy had been injected into the two demigod spirit bodies. Next was the most thorough soul fusion. The two demigods closed their eyes at the same time as if they were asleep. Duque thought that this should not be a problem. Finally there was a long wait. 1 hour, 2 hours, a full 12 hours. Suddenly the two demigods' eyes widened in anger. They immediately began to absorb the elemental energy of the magical net. 10 seconds passed. Two earth-shattering crashing sounds resounded throughout the entire boulder hill. The terrifying earthquake caused Duque to fall into a trance. It was as if the deep rock continent had already connected with Azeroth in advance. The ground instantly split open, and the zigzagged cracks extended in all directions. Then there was a sound. A wild, ancient sound that seemed to pierce the eardrums of all living beings in the surroundings. The primitive and barbaric bear race roared, announcing that they would tear apart all evil. It was just a roar, but the waves of air that swept past gave people the feeling of a raging storm. The two bears were as big as small fortresses, and their eyes were the size of water tanks. They stared fiercely at Duque. Duke Marcus, is your promise still valid? Facing the bear brothers' questioning, Duke's mouth curled up. Of course it's effective. As long as the Alliance exists, the bear race will not go extinct. The bear monsters you protect will become the fourth vassal race of the Alliance after the Murlocs, Nagas and the Karaji bug people. And I swear in the name of the demigod of Azeroth that once Sargeras is destroyed in the return of the Legion, I will release your souls and restore your freedom. A demigod's oath under the witness of the planet's will was naturally trustworthy. Feeling the faint echo from the planet's will, the grimacing bear brothers' expressions softened. Then in this period of time, please take care of us, Master. Hearing this, Duque finally breathed a sigh of relief. The two demigods who could bear the most damage among the god of the wilderness had finally been accepted as underlings. In theory, the one who could bear the most damage wasn't the bear brothers, but the tortoise god, Tat-Ora. The problem was that, he could bear it but he couldn't hold the enemy back. Unless the enemy was stupid, who would be so ruthless and risk their lives to knock on Totora's unparalleled titanium alloy tortoise shell? In any case, the turtle god's attack power was simply too weak. To put it bluntly, it couldn't kill many demons even if it was left alone. If it were Duque in command, he would only call a few elite demons to play with the tortoise god. Of course, if there was some gorilla god who repeatedly threw Tat-Ora like a stone at the demons, that would be a different matter. While Duque was dealing with the bear brothers, good news came from Mount Hyjal. The wolf god Goldring and the crow god Avina had been resurrected. However, there was a new problem. Goldring seemed to be looking for trouble with Varian. Chapter 1798. When they arrived at the peak of Mount Hyjal, the descent of the Land of Fire had yet to be completed. Even though the atmosphere was tense, it still gave off a feeling that there was still plenty of time. Hence, there was a rather hilarious scene in the empty space beside the Nordrassil Inn at the highest point of Mount Hygel. Tyron, what's wrong? Why did you call me over in such a hurry? Duque hurriedly opened the teleportation portal with his bear brothers. Tyron, who was dressed in a moon-white priest robe, seemed to be unable to maintain her dignified and noble temperament. She seemed to be possessed, or rather her tone had dropped. She covered her mouth and secretly pointed to the front. See for yourself. In the empty space, a huge white wolf pressed its front leg against William's armor, and half of its body stood upright. William, on the other hand, straightened his back and stared at Goldring's huge wolf eyes with determination. It felt as though he could press the tiny Varian to the ground with his huge wolf foot, putting on a show of planting a king in spring and reaping many more kings in autumn. If there was any danger, Brawl and Valilla would have been furious. Actually, it wasn't. The huge white wolf was naturally Goldrassil. A canine that didn't show its sharp claws wasn't considered hostile, at least. Their conversation made Duque dumbfounded, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Goldrassil opened his big mouth towards William, and his grayish-black nose was right in front of William's breastplate. Son, call me Daddy. No. William was speechless. Do you believe that I'll eat you? No. A cross-shaped vein appeared on William's forehead. If you don't scream, are you trying to see if my teeth are sharp? Get lost, all right, 2 veins. If I didn't share some of my soul with you back then, you would have died under the hammer of misfortune. Goldrassil bared his teeth. I am William Rin, the son of the great Stormwind King Lang Rin. Goldrassil. I respect your contributions, but this doesn't mean that I'll accept being the son of a wolf. William's neck was already red, and it seemed like he was reaching his limit. What's so bad about becoming the son of a demigod? Goldring was a little angry. If my father Lang was a demigod, I would be very happy. But I am human. It's not a wolf, William said firmly. Acknowledging one's ancestors was, of course, acknowledging the ancestors of the human race. Why did he choose to be a beast instead of a decent human being? William had already considered the bigger picture by not fighting to the death on the spot. However, he did not know what the wolf was thinking. William's biggest mistake was to think of the wolf's thoughts as a human. On the other side, Tyron poked the snickering Duque in the waist, finally waking him up. Tyron wasn't the only one. Even the other 2 members of William's team were staring at Duque with resentment in their eyes. If Duke hadn't singled out William to capture him that day, there wouldn't have been so many problems. Duque glared at the 2 of them. That's right. Goldrassil's character was just that strange. As long as this fellow was completely resurrected, he would definitely look for William. William the Ghost had inherited a part of Goldrassil's soul. In the eyes of the wolf god, this was even worse than his son. However, the matter still had to be resolved. Cough cough. Duque pretended to cough. In fact, Goldrassil had noticed Duque a long time ago. The purity of the elemental energy on Duque's body was like a human torch in the dark in Goldrassil's eyes. It was difficult not to see it. Duque, come quickly. Human. This is none of your business. This is a problem between me and my son. Who's your son? You. Duque suddenly attacked. He raised his hands horizontally with his palms facing downwards. The next moment, the wolf god felt his body become extremely heavy. It was a heavy feeling that made it difficult for him to even lift a finger. The deceleration spell was not rare. The deceleration spell that could suppress a demigod was rather impressive. Almost at the same time, Goldrassil's lips that covered his teeth turned upwards, revealing a mouthful of crisscrossed sharp teeth. His body slightly arched, he was ready to attack. Regardless of the reason, he was ready to attack this meddlesome demigod. Duque smiled faintly. William, what god of the wilderness? To put it bluntly, it's just a beast that has ascended from the soul and body to the divine realm. Even if it speaks the human language, it's still a beast. Beast, just use the simplest method to make him understand your will. Let's fight. With your current strength. I'll make Goldrassil's strength fall to your level. William immediately realized that Duke's words made sense. He didn't waste any time and acted on his thoughts. He unsheathed his famous twin swords on the spot, and the dazzling radiance made Goldring squint his eyes. Want to fight? Very well. I'll lower my strength. Human demigod, don't meddle. After saying that, Goldrassil turned his huge wolf head. And William, if I defeat you, you'll have to call me Daddy. No. I'll tell you with my sword that you can forget about it forever. William was almost gnashing his teeth. William turned his left arm at lightning speed, and they Shadow Ripper, slashed towards Goldrassil's wolf claws. Wolves were never creatures that relied on strength. They were creatures that relied on agility. Goldrassil didn't care at first, and was prepared to use his demigod body to take on William's sword. However, in the next second he realized that something was wrong. That abominable human demigod had actually expelled the elements in the surrounding space, causing his body's toughness to drop drastically. For a moment, Goldrassil wanted to attack Duque first. "I'm Duke Marcus, the current Supreme Commander of the Alliance. I've said it before, I'll let you have a fair battle with William." Accompanied by Duque's mocking words, he displayed the strength of a top-tier demigod. Duque's insane deceleration spell actually reduced Goldrassil's speed to the level of a legendary hero. Duque wasn't a warlock, so he didn't have any weakening curse. Even if Goldrassil's speed was reduced, the wolf god's strength wouldn't change much. Moreover, the demigod body was still the demigod body. But this was enough for William. Even though it was a dual-wielding berserker, he still had the godly special skill, armor penetration. William didn't attack immediately. Instead, he swung his swords and gave Goldrassil 5 stacks of armor penetration. A man and a wolf fought fiercely in the open space next to the hotel. This battle could be said to be chaotic and gloomy. Tyrant frowned. "Are we just going to let them fight like this?" Duque shrugged. "What can I do?" When William lost his memory and became a slave gladiator, he accidentally picked up the wolf god's soul fragment and fused it perfectly. Who can we blame for this? Chapter 1799. The relationship between William and Goldring was King messed up. With the bloodline of the Rin family, it was already a blessing for him to be able to become a legendary hero. Goldring's soul fragment definitely played a big part in William's current battle prowess. But William couldn't possibly return to his roots and become a werewolf just because of that. That was why he was stuck in a dilemma. It was impossible for William to return the soul fragment. Duque had long discovered that Goldring's werewolf soul had merged perfectly with the violent version of William. At the same time, the cowardly version of William's soul represented the inheritance of the Rin family. Sometimes, Duque even had the evil thought of asking Onyxia to come over and split William into 2 again. One would be a demigod wolf prince and lead the werewolves. The other would be the king of Stormwind and continue to lead Stormwind. Of course, this was just a thought. If he really did that, there would be nothing left for the old wolf king Jean. And the Stormwind kingdom would also become a weak chicken, unable to recover from this setback. Duque shamelessly brought out beach chairs, popcorn and other snacks. Together with Tyrant and the rest, they watched the wolf and man vent their dissatisfaction and energy. Overall, William was at a disadvantage. Even though William trained himself to be very strong, the limits of a mortal were clear. As long as he didn't cross the boundary of the divine realm, his physical endurance was limited. Wolves were originally a race with good endurance. In order to hunt, they could chase their prey day and night without rest. Moreover, Duque's deceleration spell didn't weaken Goldring's physique. They fought and roared along the way. Goldring seemed to be stubborn. He preached along the way, bragging about his glorious history in ancient times. In general, it was that his papa was very powerful, that he was invincible in the wilderness of ancient Kalimdor, that he had beaten up demons, and that he was the vanguard of the god of the wilderness. At first, Valilla and Brawl were quite nervous. Later, when they realized that William was at a disadvantage due to his lack of stamina, the shameless blood elf thief suggested that Duque continue to whittle away at Goldring's strength. Duque rolled his eyes. "Why don't you just ask me to kill the wolf god?" The wolf deity could accept fairness, but he absolutely could not accept being oppressed. Any more and he would fall out with them. In the end, it was Goldring who felt bored. "I'm done. I'm not fighting anymore. I'll go back and think about how to teach your stone-headed son a lesson." "I'm not your son." William rebuked the wolf god. "If I say you are, then you are. I'm not." The story between the wolf god and Varian was more like a small interlude. As the Land of Fire began to fuse completely with Azeroth, no matter how eager he was to find his son, Goldring had no choice but to put aside his personal affairs and enter a state of battle. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Looking from the northern foothills of Mount Hyjal to the southern foothills, every elf could see the sky filled with fire meteors falling in all directions. However, these terrifying fireballs grew larger and larger. When they flew closer to the northern foothills, they suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it was an illusion. It's not an illusion. When the space of the Land of Fire fuses with Azeroth, These fireballs will really fly over, Duque said with certainty. Over the past few days, even when the Night Elf sentinels were on break duty, they looked nervously at the world of fire in the south that was getting bigger and bigger. The only thing that could give them comfort was the flying city of Dalagen, which was hovering above the western side of Mount Hyjal. The alliance was as reliable as ever. They had sent their city of wizards and Duque was personally in charge. Only the elements could resist the elements. This was already the strongest combat force that the alliance could send out. On this day the direction of the wind changed and a strong wind suddenly blew in the south. Some sentinels were already screaming. Fire! The fire is coming. The flames in the southern foothills are spreading towards us. Countless elves were alarmed. They rushed out and saw a strange scene that they would never forget in their lives. That was the true meaning of a prairie fire. Countless balls of fire seemed to spread endlessly towards the north, like the light of the rising sun chasing away the darkness. Even though Duque had ordered the alliance to use bulldozers and logging equipment to chop down a large number of trees, forcibly opening up a fire belt that was more than a kilometer wide between the southern and northern foothills, the fire was still spreading unreasonably. The fire continued to spread unreasonably. With a crackling sound, it spread across the mountainous area that was already devoid of green, devouring everything in its path. The short tree stumps became torches, and the scorched land that had already been stripped of grass was still burning away all the nutrients inside. Then, the sea of fire passed through the fire belt and burned into the dense sea of trees at the northern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The towering trees fell one after another and countless leaves were ignited. They fell from the branches and before they could fall to the ground, they were already burned into ashes in midair. Countless sparks were swept up into the sky by the surging flames, and soon, a larger area of the forest was set ablaze, and the cycle started again. Oh, our forest! Heavens, how is this any different from the Burning Legion? The night elves wept. Their tears flew into the distance along with their hair that danced wildly in the wind. Tyrant and Malfurion's faces were ashen. In the end, they could not revive the demigod Cenarius before the land of fire descended. We can only rely on Duque, Malfurion said in a low voice. Yes. Tyrant looked up at the majestic magic city in the sky, and her gaze turned from unease to determination. He has never disappointed me. In the Dalagen, Duque sat in the largest mage tower in the city. It was a mage tower that the Dalagen had specially built for him, the demigod of the weave. Duque might not even be able to stay in the Dalagen for a day in a year. Since Duque had made the Dalagen and Naxxramas one of the three most important nodes of the weave in Azeroth, he still had to build this mage tower properly. Sitting on the highest floor of his mage tower, Duque sat on a chair that was connected to the entire Dalagen city through a magic formation. In a sense, the Dalagen city was already Duque's private property, because the entire magic network of the city had been completely integrated into the weave. Duque gently raised his right hand, and his finger drew a line in the air. I said this is the border. Duque's seemingly simple whisper was clearly heard by every Dalagen mage. Even Kale, who was waiting by Duque's side, could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The entire Dalagen city lit up. The muzzle of the main cannon that had not been used for a long time suddenly lit up. It was not the bombardment of the main magic cannon, but it was better than the full power of the main cannon. The purple light that shot out from the muzzle easily tore the earth apart. From west to east, the entire Mount Hyjal was divided into two parts, north and south. It was a terrifying move that ended the surging of the elements, like a wall separating the earth from the earth. All the flames were isolated for no reason. They tumbled and surged, surging and surging. They even seemed to endlessly sweep high into the sky, wanting to break through the clouds and reach the horizon. In the end, not a single flame could surpass the boundary that Duque had drawn. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.